Hey, everybody. Thanks again for joining me here for Mondays with Mike. Super busy today. This will be on the short side, which thank goodness, right? But we got a lot going on. First of all, today is the first day of spring. Technically, it begins this afternoon at 4:24 in the afternoon. So we'll talk real briefly about that. I also want to talk about this sleet that we had around here briefly on Saturday, like actual ice pellets that came down, despite the fact that we were way above freezing. And then finally, I want to end with the big sort of weather related news that came out today, which was the climate report that was just issued by the United Nations. And it's, scary stuff. So let's begin. First of all, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And I want to begin with the fact that today's first day of spring. And so what happens here is that the Earth is at a tilt, 23.5-degree tilt. And when we get to sort of the halfway point between winter and summer, and then again between summer and winter, we end up with an equinox. And that's what you see on the screen right now. Some people say equinox. I don't know, equinox. And it's where the sun's light shines directly on the equator. So as a result, you have all areas of the Earth receiving the same amount of daylight and nighttime. So if you're in Canada, if you're in Hawaii, if you're in Argentina, if you're in Indonesia, if you're in Texas, we're all getting essentially 12 hours of daylight, 12 hours of nighttime, give or take a few minutes. So that is today. And so from here on out, we're going to continue to see those hours of daylight get longer and longer. And so eventually it'll result in us reaching our longest days of the year, the biggest amount of daylight, which comes with the summer solstice. And that'll come up June 21st. So that's where we are with that. So welcome to spring. It's cold. We were down in the 30s this morning. Some spots actually made it down to 32. We should warm up to about 60 today, Monday, if you're watching this Monday. And then we'll be right back in the mid 80s coming up by Thursday, maybe Wednesday, but then especially heading into Thursday. All right, so now let's go ahead and talk about what happened around here on Saturday, which was this crazy sleet. Now, why am I showing you? You're not going to believe what I'm going to show you here. Here it is. Hold on a second. This, I'm going to search for this. I don't know why it's not popping up right now, but evaporative cooling. Watch this. Cooler for car. Okay. Now, why am I showing you this? Some people will call this a swamp cooler. What does this have to do with sleet? Well, surprisingly, it actually has a lot to do with it. So what you're seeing right here is what they used for air conditioning in cars before there was air conditioning, before you actually had an AC system in the car. So this is a tube, and there's water that is inside the tube. Okay. And as you're driving, and this was especially useful in dry places, like let's say you were in Southern California, you're in Arizona. It wouldn't work as well in a humid place like Houston. But as you're driving along, the air, even if it's hot air, it gets pushed through this apparatus that you attach to the window of your car. And as the air blows through it, the water evaporates into it, which cools the air. And then that air gets pushed into the car, and it feels nice because it's cooler than the air around. So that's like a real basic kind of rudimentary air conditioning system that they used to put on some cars. Now, I'm not saying everybody had these, but they're sort of a collector's item these days. The Thermador is what one of the brand names was for it. So it's kind of a neat thing. So, okay, why are you showing me this? What does this have to do with sleet? Well, think about when you get out of the shower. And I don't want too many details now. Just keep it in your own head. When you get out of the shower or when you get out of a swimming pool, you feel cold. When you, even if it's not necessarily cold outside, when you get out of the pool, you start to feel cold. Why? Well, because your body's wet. Well, why should that make you cold, right? The water is evaporating. And as the water evaporates, it cools the air. It also carries some heat off of your skin, but it cools the air, and that's called evaporational cooling. So what happened in the case here on Saturday was, and by the way, they had a half a foot of snow out in the Big Bend National Park area of Texas. But what happened here is that our temperature at the surface, our temperature was about 47 degrees. Freezing is 32. You don't usually think you're going to get ice at 47, but every once in a while you can. So there's a layer above the ground, and it may be a few thousand feet above the ground. It's not super high, but a few thousand feet above the ground that is both cool and, more importantly, dry. You don't want a saturated wet layer. You want a very dry layer. And just like that gadget that goes on the side of the car, when water falls into it, liquid water, it cools that column of air. It cools that air. And if it cools it enough down to 32 degrees, now all of a sudden that raindrop freezes into a little pellet. And that's what we ended up having around here, kind of mixed in with the rain, were these tiny ice pellets, despite the fact that we were 15 degrees above freezing when all this happened. It was the effect of evaporational cooling, just like we have with this gadget that they used to put on the outside of trucks and cars back in the 50s. I guess 40s and 50s. So anyway, it's kind of cool. It is cool literally, and also cool figuratively cool. You know what's not cool? The state of our climate. So the IPCC, that stands for Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. This is the United Nations. And every few years, they issue a new report. This is the 6th report that they've issued on the state of the climate in the world. And it doesn't necessarily have much in the way of good news. Effectively, the news is, I'll read you some of the highlights or lowlights from the press release. And this was just released today, March 20th, 2023. Urgent climate action can secure a livable future for all. There are multiple feasible, effective options to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and adapt to human-caused climate change. See, I like the adapting part. And there are available now, the scientists of this panel are saying. So, you may be wondering, okay, well, what's the bottom line? The bottom line is two things. One is that you'll see here, I have highlighted that the mean temperature, the average temperature around the world, according to the science, or as Lena DeFlorius would say, the pointy heads, they've said that the temperature from 2010 to 2020 was 1.1 degrees Celsius above what they call pre-industrial levels. I know it's a lot. Pre-industrial meaning you go back to the year 1850 through 1900, the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. We didn't really have cars yet. We had some trains, but there wasn't really like a big effect by the burning of oil and things like that, and coal and gas. There was some effect, but not much. So they take that temperature that's derived, it was measured directly. I mean, we did have temperature observations from that time frame. Some of it is, there are scientific methods to derive what the temperature was. And then they compare it to what it was over the last 10 years, or at least from 2011 through 2020, and they say the temperature has risen 1.1 degrees Celsius, which is about 2 degrees Fahrenheit on average. So big deal, right? Well, the scientists say that the key number to watch is 1.5 degrees Celsius. Why is that? Well, that is the goal of the United Nations, is to keep our temperature rise from exceeding 1.5 degrees Celsius, which would put us near 3 degrees Fahrenheit. Why is that the goal? Because according to this panel, once we get beyond 1.5 degrees Celsius, that gets us near the point of no return, where these cascading effects will start to happen that make going back to normal levels harder. So they have a list, and I'll tell you something, the paper itself, right here, let me tell you, this is not light reading. This is not light reading. This is like, if you really want your eyes to go crossed, you go ahead and read through this. But the bottom line is they do outline some urgency, and they list things from high confidence to moderate confidence to very high confidence and so forth. And I will share with you some, let me cut to the chase here. I'll share with you one of the more interesting graphics that they came up with. So this is a graphic that shows the effect of different types of climate mitigation on the temperature. So in other words, like breaking it down, like if we do this, it'll have this much of an effect. If we do this, it'll have a smaller effect, that kind of thing. They also break it down by how much it costs. So let's just start off with an example, because this is a lot to process. So I'm going to zoom in here on this one where it says solar. Okay. So this is the biggest one. So they're saying that solar, when you look at all of the different things we can do, from switching fuels to driving electric vehicles to changing the way we do agriculture, all of those things, switching to solar energy actually has this longest bar. So it would have the biggest effect. And then right beneath it would be wind, switching to wind. And then it has a listing of how many tons of carbon dioxide it would save each year. That's, carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas, one of the greenhouse gases. And so the less we can produce of that, the better. So, but this is interesting how they broke it down, is that, okay, so solar has a big impact, switching to that. Switching to wind has a big impact. Now, the blue part of the line, stay with me here, folks. The blue part of the line is the cheapest part, meaning that we could make the switch with very little to no impact on the economy, which is nice. The yellow area is where it has somewhat of an impact on the economy. And then where you start getting into the reds, that's where it's expensive. But the nice part is, I suppose, we can go to the whole blue area of wind and solar and not have it affect the economy very much. Now, you'll see under that, it says, reduce the methane from coal, oil, and gas. A lot of that is very expensive to do. Also, you may have heard of carbon capture. That's where, in an ideal world, you can, burn all the oil that you want, and then you would have methods, machines and so forth, to capture the CO2 from the atmosphere and then bury it underground or convert it to a compound that can then be buried. So that one is very expensive, and you'll see it's here at the bottom of the choices for reducing CO2, I guess because it's expensive. I'm surprised to see nuclear power so low. I don't know. Is there politics in this? I don't know. There's also, this is the land, water, and food category. So what can we do there? Improving cropland management is listed in this more expensive category, which is the yellow and red. And that's to reduce the conversion of natural ecosystems. I think basically it means encroaching on new lands to turn them into agriculture. Shifting to sustainable, healthy diets. I mean, I assume that means eating less meat or, crops that are easier to grow. It's complicated. And then here, this is interesting too, settlements and infrastructure. So building energy efficient buildings is very expensive. That has the biggest effect, but it also is a red line. So obviously it is very expensive. Fuel efficient vehicles, they have as cheap, but also having a much lower effect than switching to solar, which is interesting. Riding buses and bicycling, of course. And then there are some societal things here. Social safety nets. It gets into the weeds a little bit here with some of the social stuff because I don't know. Maybe it's over my head. But the bottom line is here, this is according to the UN, guys, if we were to switch to solar and wind and switch to electric cars and shift to a sustainable, healthy diet, then that would make a big difference according to the United Nations. So there you go. Also, the bottom line is that according to them, according to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, if we don't do anything, we basically need to act like it's an emergency right now, drop everything right now. And which of course is not going to happen. But that's what they say we have to do to prevent this, catastrophe. How do I feel about it? I mean, I think like most people, like most reasonable people, I mean, you want a clean world to live in, and you want your kids to have a safe place to live. And so I think it's going to be a combination. It has to be a combination of adapting, meaning that, maybe don't build more buildings in flood prone areas near the coastline. That's one way to do it. That's an adaptation, is that if you're worried about people being inundated by water or loss of life and property, then you're going to have to start moving away from the coastline. I mean, that's one way to do it. These electric cars, it's complicated. I know it's complicated because there's a lot of nasty stuff that goes into electric cars. There's a lot of mining that's terrible. And there's like slave labor, that they're using to mine for cobalt and all these different things in Africa. It's just bad. So I didn't see them mention that, but I think the thing is, there's not an easy answer, but we should try to come up with a reasonable solution soon. But as long as everything stays all political, and as long as everybody hates each other on Twitter and keeps, you know what I mean? You know what I'm talking about. Nothing's ever going to get solved. So that's my view of it. I mean, I'll take a Tesla. They're expensive. I'm not going to spend that kind of money on a car right now, but if you want to buy me one, I'll take it. So anyway, that'll do it for this week. Is it heavy? This is a heavy one, wasn't it? I mean, this is like doom and gloom. I mean, there's going to be, you should take a look at some of the stuff in the report. It's like, forget about it, and there's a degree of blame too. There's a lot of blame and guilt in the report too. That's like, I don't know, like my grandchildren are going to be mad at me or something because I didn't. Anyway, let me know what you think in the comments. And controversial subject, I know. I just want what's best for everybody. I really do. And so we need compromise. We need common sense compromise. It's not going to be a one world government where we, just institute our, wholesale changes and take away everybody's cars. And that's never going to happen, right? So we have to kind of work within the confines of reality. That's just my opinion. So anyway, that'll do it for this week's climate change edition of Mondays with Mike. And special thanks to my mom and brother for watching all the way through to the end, the only ones, I'm sure. It was a very busy day. I know I'm kind of like, I feel like I'm a little bit edgy. I don't mean to be. It's just busy, thirsty. Mondays are my busiest days. So anyway, have a great day, everybody. Thanks so much for watching. Take care.